number one thing you can do is, again, that communication.
Right.
If you are talking to them, you follow up after the board meeting and say, hey, thanks for your input. This was really, can you help me with this? And maybe we can meet at your office next week and I'd love to give you an update on that deal that we talked about, right?
Right.
But do not wait for that 90-day board meeting or 30-day board meeting to come around.
Right.
You have to keep that communication going constantly.
I'm John Janarone, Editor-in-Chief of IPO Edge and CorpGov. Thrilled to be back here at Nasdaq Market Site in New York City on this hot Monday morning. I've got with me here Brian Keating, good friend of ours, who is a partner at EisnerAmper. We're going to talk about the importance of board directors at private companies. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
John, good to be back.
So Ryan, last time, if you'll recall, we talked about the importance of a strong financial model as one of the key ingredients for companies you advise. Tell me about the importance of a board of directors and why founders should be afraid of the board.
Yeah, it is. Generally, most of the companies we work with do have this fear of their board. And just to even take a step back, a lot of what I do is working with startups, early stage, so Series A, B, C, D, going through the alphabet, even a little bit earlier. And a board is something early on that they don't necessarily get to pick.
Yeah.
It's really comprised of people that are on the cap table. And so working with my clients, my founders, there's really a lack of understanding, I think, in terms of the role of the board, how to prepare for the board, and how to engage with the board outside of board meeting cycles, which is so important.
So what you're suggesting is that sometimes these board meetings happen and they're a little bit disorganized, right? And that you're not achieving as much as you should?
Yeah, and it's, one thing that I always suggest to my clients, right, is that you should really be in full communication with your board. Right, you should be prepared for board meetings, but they shouldn't take over like 3 weeks of your entire focus leading up to a board meeting.
Right.
So there comes a good cadence, and really engaging with your board members to understand what kind of updates they want and what kind of information they need is key.
Gotcha.
And the truth is, how you prepare for a board meeting will change. For example, pre-revenue, your topics are going to be more about engineering milestones and hiring key people and setting up a sales process. Once you launch and you scale, you're going to be talking about customer acquisition costs and churn and landing and expanding within a SaaS type model. So you really have to keep the board meeting relevant to where you're at based on the stage of company.
Gotcha. Now, sorry, go ahead.
I was to say that the biggest mistake that I see is people just don't, or clients just don't understand how to get value out of a board.
Gotcha.
And one thing that I'll say to my clients all the time is I truly believe that the board of directors themselves is one of the biggest assets that startups fail to really get value out of. They just don't know how to extract value from a board, and it is by far one of the most valuable pieces they have at their disposal.
Tell us, if you could, just stepping back for a second, about the evolution of the board. So of course you mentioned the founder, so the founder is going to be on the board. Then as investors come in, they will get seats, and then you put in an independent as well. But when you're talking about extracting value, which of those directors can contribute the most, or should they all do it equally?
So the people I work with are the founders, right? And it always starts out, there's usually one or two, hopefully two, founders that are on the board.
Yeah.
That next step generally happens with the first funding round, the institutional round.
Yeah.
And what you'll see early on in boards is that if you're on the board, you're usually on the cap table.
Yeah.
Right, as an investor. You're there to oversee your investment. You're there from the cap table perspective.
Yeah.
You brought up independent, which is really a key allowance, I suppose you could say, that is part of a board that most clients, when I start talking to them, they're not really aware that they can put in an independent or that they should.
Right.
And I'll always encourage people, try to get that independent placed before you start to bring in the institutional board members that are coming when they write the checks. Now, you can't make it completely, offensive to those people, but try to find a neutral that at least you can pick that that they're going to be okay with, or that they should be okay with. Because as you know, you're trying to achieve an odd number, ideally. And so you usually have two founders, you usually have two people that come in with the round, whether it's a seed round or an A round, and then you have to we'll get into that later, but as the rounds keep increasing, you got to either bump people off or expand. But then you have that independent.
Yeah.
And that independent is key to really it's almost like a neutral, right?
Yeah.
Right, trying to be not the founder, but not representing the biggest chunk on the cap table that can hopefully be there to kind of keep the voting, so you don't have ties, 2-2 type.
And speaking of ties and voting, tell us about the tension that can exist between the institutional investors and the founders, and then where does the independent come in there?
Yeah, so, starting out, everything starts out very harmonious. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
I always say, like, there are no bigger fans that you have than the people on your board.
Yeah.
Right? They've wrote a check. They are there to help you, right?
Yeah.
And they really want to see this company succeed.
Yeah.
But things start to get, as you can imagine, maybe a little tense if execution isn't happening.
Right.
As long as you're executing, everybody's going to be happy.
Yeah.
Right. But what happens if you're not?
Yeah.
I've been in board meetings where there was no indication of any kind of, surprise coming, and walk out of there without a CEO. Just gone on the spot. And it's really important to execute. And that's really where the friction's going to come from, is if you start not hitting numbers. And this gets back to, I think, my most important principle that I stress. And it came from a VC in a board meeting, that a highly respected guy, one of the most sound bits of information I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And he said nothing new should ever be discussed in a board meeting.
Oh.
And that is, if you think about that for a minute, right? When you assemble that group of people, it should be about how to take action.
Right.
It should not be, hey, guess what? We didn't close this deal.
Okay, so they should find out in real time as things are happening, so that they can think about it, maybe do some homework, get ready to discuss it when you're in the war room there, right?
Yeah, I encourage, you got to reach out and talk to them on a regular basis. Do not wait for board meetings. Again, board meetings should be to discuss how to take action. Don't drop surprises in board meetings, ever.
I can't help but ask you what you make of the Sam Altman thing that happened with that board. I get maybe that was a highly unusual situation.
Very
right?
unusual, but I think it highlights the tension, right? That can come, and it does, especially as the company, like, that's an extreme example of an early stage company, but by then they're so large, and they have so many investors, and they have so many people trying to say, we want to go this direction or this direction, and it does, especially when you're a founder. And I love founders. All I work with are founders, and I really admire how dedicated they are to their vision, right? There is nothing in their mind that says this is not going to succeed.
Yeah.
Right? And when you have a group of people that are coming in and trying to move you a different direction, it does. It causes friction, and especially like in the Sam Altman situation, that's a very successful company.
Yeah.
Right? You are way beyond a startup.
Right.
You are having people start to give influence, thinking about things way beyond what my companies think about. My companies think about how am I going to raise that next round of financing?
Yeah.
Right? How am I going to show that I'm on a good growth trajectory here?
Yeah.
And the board members that are around the table at this point are so skilled, honestly, in this stage.
Yeah.
And this is one of my points with clients. This is where the value comes from.
Right.
When you're a founder, you sit on one board, your own, right? When you're a VC, you might sit on 5 or 6 boards, and you might have been doing this for 10 or 15 years, and you probably have a dozen partners.
Right.
So the collective knowledge that these VCs, these board members, can bring to a founder is really, you can't measure it. And so one of the things that I encourage, and you mentioned this homework, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a funny concept, but it's real.
Yeah.
Like, you should go to every board meeting with an ask.
Yeah.
Right? And it's usually, especially for early stage, it's usually an introduction.
Yeah.
Right? I'm looking for a chief marketing officer. I need a way into Walmart. Do you know anybody, a contract manufacturer, in Asia?
Yeah.
So it's usually that's where their value is. It's really easy for them to pull those relationships in to give you, but if you don't ask them, they don't know.
Right. It's just amazing, because it's just standing there in broad daylight. All this wealth of information. I'm glad that you're, encouraging people who are watching this to take advantage of it. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, and we talked about it in the green room, Ryan, is if you're thinking about way down the road, going public, will the board that you're crafting now of say 5 people, will that will the future board have any resemblance to this original one? It might a little bit, right? But it's going to change a lot.
Hopefully it still has some of the DNA.
Yeah.
Companies can go through a lot between here and there.
Yeah.
It's kind of obvious to say, but like early on, the board is the true founders,
Yeah.
right? And the early investors. And those investors literally refer to themselves as seed stage or early stage investors for a reason, right?
Yeah.
They are not the same investors that are going to be steering the board when you're doing your S1 and going public.
Right.
Right? So it will change. Usually what happens as you do another round of financing, that the B comes on top of the A and et cetera, there will be a new large check from the new round that wants to sit on the board and represent their investment and be on the board. And honestly, it's a good idea for the early stage VCs to step away, because again, these are the people that scale.
Right.
These are the people that have different relationships that are needed at a different time.
Yeah.
Right. So you can always fall back on giving people what's called advisory rights.
Yeah.
So you could be on the basically just sitting in the room, but not actually like a board observer.
Yeah.
Actually, is what it's called. So you can be in the room, but then you're not a vote.
Right.
Right. And you usually kind of get asked to leave when it comes to the closed session around option grants and things like that. But then there's also the board of advisors, which is very
I was gonna
different.
ask you about that. Yeah.
Okay. So, but before we leave the board, you know, the one thing that I like to again kind of emphasize is that these people are not against you, right?
Right.
Like it's this kind of this general fear, especially first-time founders or very early stage, you know, companies, where they look at this as almost like a parole board, right? Like they're going into this hoping to keep their job by the time they come out of this.
Yeah.
Right. And the number one thing you can do is, again, that communication.
Right.
If you are talking to them, you follow up after the board meeting and say, hey, you know, thanks for your input. This was really, can you help me with this? And maybe we can meet at your office next week and I'd love to give you an update on that deal that we talked about, right?
Right.
But do not wait for that 90-day board meeting or 30-day board meeting to come around.
Right.
You have to keep that communication going constantly. So that's I mean, if you can do that, if you can show up prepared, if you have an ask, if you are communicating constantly to your board members, so you're taking action in board meetings, you're not sharing news. Right? That's the big mistake I see companies make. Boards don't like that, right? I mean, you can imagine they sit on 5 or 6 companies at a time, right? They don't want to come into a board meeting and all of a sudden be surprised by some major news, right? So giving them a heads up, talking to them outside of the board cycle, asking them for homework. And I like, when I come in as the CFO, the first thing I will do is go to the board and say, what kind of reports do you like? Right, because they all have their own, like this is my favorite metric, or this is what really I have seen. So I do that as a CEO as well. You know, say, hey, what is it that you really, you know, kind of, do you have an approach? Do you have a metric? Like in the finance world, people will say, I love waterfall charts, or I really like to see a rolling 13-week forecast. I don't know why, but you know, but people have their things. And if you go in and ask, it just makes the board meetings that much better. I mean, you really need to embrace these people, honestly.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Let's just, to wrap this up, let's go back to the advisory board for a moment. Tell us how valuable that can be. Just as valuable as the board of directors in a different way.
Advisory boards are very interesting, and I see companies get this wrong constantly. Most people use advisors as a profile picture on a fundraising deck. Right? And they'll just say, like, here's all of our advisors. You know, and I guarantee you, I do a lot of panels with VCs, and I love to ask this question because the audience is generally confused. I'm like, have you ever invested in a company because of their board of advisors? Nobody has ever said yes. Right? The point is, board of advisors are very valuable, especially to a startup, because they can bring a very specific point of expertise. Like you can have an advisor that is a senior sales VP at Salesforce or something. And for that purpose, they are amazing, right? And they're not a board of directors. They don't have voting, right? They're not sitting in, listening to your financials, right? They are advisors that you award with usually a grant, an option grant. The one thing I will say, if you have an advisor on your investor deck, you better be ready for them to be called. Right? They better know who you are. when the VC or the potential investor reaches out. But board of advisors, use them. Use them as your company grows and goes through different pain points, right? From pre-launch to maybe your beta to full-scale product to, you know, it's so, I think, and there's a marketplace for this too, right? It's so nice to go out and find an answer for a specific problem you're having without having to hire the person full-time. You know, and these folks, they love to, you know, advisors love what they do. They love to get their compensation, but they're ultra connected as well. You talk about giving homework to the board.
Yeah.
Board of advisors, that's exactly what they're there for.
Right.
They are only there to help drive value to you. So I really like using a board of advisors, but don't confuse them with the board of directors.
Gotcha. All right, Ryan. Well, this has been a terrific session once again, another in our series here. So I'm looking forward to more of this down the road. This has been Ryan Keating, our friend from EisnerAmper. I'm John Janarone, editor-in-chief of IPO Edge and CorpGov, signing off from Nasdaq Market Site.